This is the Kitchen Sink WP Podcast, episode 629.
I program my own computer.
We have a server crash, 404 error, page not found, links aren't working, system is crashing, system is crashing, system is crashing.
Your old HTML website, barely alive. We have the technology. We have WordPress. A new website, better than it was before. Better, stronger, faster. Why, hello everybody, this is Adam Silvey, host of the Kitchen Sink WP Podcast. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. All right, upcoming events. We have one next weekend. It's an online-only event, I believe. It's Women's WordPress Day in Latam. I believe that's in Chile. I'm 99% sure it's in Chile. So it's online. Looks pretty cool. One-day camp, March 21st. WordPress Women's Day in Latam. All right, moving on. Segment 1 in the news. A handful of things to talk about here. All WordPress related. Well, obviously WordPress, but core stuff. So WordPress 6.94 is available, but it came out really quick. Like 6.92 and 6.93 were released, dealing with 10 security issues, but then a bug got in there somehow, and it had an issue with a number of sites out in the world. So all that said, in like I think it's 24, maybe 36 hours, 6.92, 6.93, and now 6.94 is out, and it is recommended, highly recommended that you update your site because it's a security release fix. So there's that. Also in the news of WordPress, 7.0 beta 5 is out, so if you want to keep testing, do that as well. It's still on track. But speaking of that, WordPress 7, I heard some things. I was looking at track tickets and talking to my friend about it. One of the features coming is the collaboration issue, right? Real-time collaboration. Think Google Docs style editing inside the editor. But the catch is how it's working under the hood. Right now, it relies on HTTP polling, meaning each editor repeatedly hits the server to check for updates. That can create a lot of database requests, especially on shared hosting or large multi-site networks. So because of that, some hosts and core contributors are pushing for the feature to be disabled on default rather than enabled on default, because hosts need to test and see how that's going to affect their performance of their servers. So keep that in mind as we get closer to WordPress 7.0 releasing with that feature itself. So yeah, kind of cool reading those track tickets and whatnot. So neat things out there. All right, is that it in the news? Yeah, that's it in the news. All right, moving on to segment 2, the meat potatoes of this week's episode. So over the past week or so, I've been thinking about something that I think a lot of people that listen to this podcast have experienced at least one point or another in their careers. It's the moment when your job doesn't dramatically change overnight, but it slowly evolves. Responsibilities get added here and there, a new initiative pops up, a small task gets handed your way, and individually, none of those things feels like a big deal. But after a while, you step back and realize something interesting is going on. The job you're doing today doesn't look like it was what you're doing 6 months ago, or 16 months ago, or 6 years ago. And that raises a question a lot of people quietly wrestle with. And oddly enough, I've had probably at least half a dozen, maybe a dozen people talk to me about this in the last, 3 to 4 months alone. It's a weird timing that it's kind of just all bubbled up right now. So with that, I wanted to talk about it. And there's like a couple of sections here, what to do here, how to handle it, especially if you work for somebody else. It really comes down to when you work for a bigger enterprise than yourself. Okay. But there's something to be said about if you own the company as well here. So number 1, the quiet creep of responsibility. In a lot of workplaces, responsibilities don't expand in some big formal announcement. Most places it doesn't happen. It's much more subtle than that. Someone asks if they can sit in on a strategy call, or if you can do that, right? If you wouldn't mind. Another week, you might help coordinate something that touches project management. Maybe you start reviewing the work or helping with QA. You have experience in that area. And then there's some marketing input or documentation or internal planning, whatever it may be. None of those things are bad. In fact, many of them can be very interesting, even rewarding. It's true. But over time, what starts as a handful of small tasks can slowly stack together to something much larger than originally intended. And it's easy not to notice that it happens when it happens in real time, right? So that leads me to number 2 here. There's 5, I think. I have 5 kind of sections in this. So that number 2 is the internal debate that most people have. This is where the internal conversation begins for yourself. You might ask yourself questions like, am I being just too sensitive about the workload? Is this simply what growth in a role looks like? Should I figure it out and just kind of keep moving forward? Most people want to be helpful. I do. They want to contribute to the team. I do. And they want to be seen as someone who can handle responsibility. Again, I do, right? And I'm sure people listening to this podcast do as well. But there is a tipping point where being helpful quietly turns into overloaded persona. It's not great. And interestingly enough, this isn't unique to one company, one industry. It's many industries, many people. I've talked, like I said, to friends and colleagues, even a few listeners of this podcast who have shared similar stories of their own workplaces. Different environments, same pattern. All right, moving into the third area here is the signals when it's time to speak up. Because the one thing that can help is recognizing when those signals are there and maybe getting out of balance. First and foremost, capacity compression. Everything suddenly feels urgent. The schedule that used to feel manageable now feels constantly tight. Another one is context switching. Sorry about that. You find yourself jumping between roles throughout the day. Strategy discussions, execution work, coordination, internal communications, external meetings, each one requiring a different mindset. And then, of course, the third one is quality risk. You're still doing the work, but it's getting harder to maintain the level of quality you expect from yourself and that the job expects from you, right? So there's that balance. So one simple practice that helps here, I believe, is documentation. When issues arise or when responsibilities start expanding, it can be helpful to jot things down. Not as a complaint list, but simply as notes. Over time, those notes can help you see patterns and remember specific examples when conversations about workload or priorities eventually come up. It's just kind of like a thing you need to start doing. All right, number 4, how to raise a conversation. If the time does come to talk about workload, the framing of that conversation really does matter here. Instead of approaching it from a place of frustration, it can be very helpful to frame it around alignment and priorities. For example, you might say something like, I want to make sure I'm allocating my time in the most effective way for the team. Then, of course, you walk through the areas you're currently supporting, strategy, coordination, documentation, client comms, whatever applies in your situation. This turns the conversation into something constructive. It becomes much less about complaining and more about making sure expectations, priorities, and capacities are completely aligned. And that kind of conversation is actually healthy for teams. A friend of mine literally just shared this with me, and they don't know I'm going to say this, so no names, no company mentioned here. But I quote, I just had that same conversation with my manager. As in, I know you have additional projects for me, but I want to make sure that the expectations around what I'm currently doing adjust accordingly, end quote. Yeah, it's a big deal. If you don't bring it up, then, feelings arise that can get to a point of frustration. So, okay. And the final one here is seeing it from the leadership side. It's worth acknowledging because it's important. I've been an owner in the past. And I do want to say that sometimes leadership simply doesn't see the accumulation of the work that's happening. Not because I was ignoring it or they're ignoring it, but because responsibilities were added in small increments over time. Now, from their perspective, it may have been one request here, another small ask there, but they don't see the combined effect of all those pieces. The other reason documentation can help, having notes about responsibilities, like I said earlier, those tasks, the changes in scope can give you something concrete to reference later if the opportunity arises to talk about workload or role evolution, right? So transparency just helps here. It helps everyone understand the full picture. So closing thoughts, little action item here for you. Most professionals want to do good work, help their team succeed, help the company do well. The instinct to contribute is a good thing, but it's also important to periodically step back and ask the simple question: does the work I'm doing today still align with the expectations and priorities of the role that I was told about and that I accepted to do? Okay, they're hand in hand, right? If you're feeling that slow creep of responsibility, one practical step is to start documenting things. Write down the tasks, responsibilities, moments where you felt workload started to stretch beyond what felt sustainable. You may never need those notes, but if the time comes, you have a conversation about priorities, capacity, role clarity, you'll be able to approach it in a very thoughtful and in a constructive manner, not just be mad and yelling at people. Okay, so there's that. I hope that helps because I've just had this feeling for, at least 3-4 months now from other people that this is a thing that's out there right now. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's something in the air, but there you go. If you have any feedback on that, if you want to share, by all means, if you want to share anonymously, you can do that as well. So cool. Let me know. All right, moving on. Segment 3, tip and tool of the week. This week, it's a tip. It's a piece of software, both Mac and PC, Windows-based, Mountain Duck. I've been testing this out. It lets you mount your servers from cloud storage, much like it's on your own computer. I do a lot of stuff with Google Cloud these days. What they call it, G Suite, whatever it is, Google Drive. Yeah. So I don't like the fact that you have to use the web interface, and it's just slow to move things and share things. So I just wanted more of an interface, a GUI, if you will. So Mountain Duck looks pretty cool. Testing it out. And, I have no connection to them whatsoever. I do use CyberDuck, by the way, for my FTP, SFTP services in the past. So I know the company, but I don't have any connection. Check it out, mountainduck.io. All right, I'm going to wrap it up here. If you have any questions, go ahead and send it in via email, adam@KitchensinkWP.com, or use that speak pipe function on the website. If you want to support the show, become a Patreon. That'd be great. You can also buy me a coffee. You want to sponsor the show, form on the website, fill it out, get it right back to you. Thanks for listening. See you next week. Now go out and do some awesome things with WordPress. All right? Bye-bye.